All right. Well, like I said, thank you all for being here. My name is Dr. William Hansard. I am a digital collections specialist at the Theodore Roosevelt Center in Dickinson, North Dakota. If you're joining us from Lance's side of things and you don't know what the TR, as we call it, the TR Center is, we exist primarily to to serve our digital library of Theodore Roosevelt papers and other historical materials. So Theodore Roosevelt's stuff is all over the country. It's in Washington, D.C., it's in New York, it's in San Antonio, it's everywhere. And so we are working with our digital library to unify and annotate all of these different kinds of historical materials. So that can mean letters, it can mean film, as we're going to show you tonight, it can mean newspaper articles, all kinds of things. And I will bring up our website just in case you haven't seen it before. And can you all see my screen? Getting some nods, good. There it is. So this is our website where you can see all of these historic materials we have for you, including the films that we're going to look at tonight. We have some things in the chat here. Oh, good. A link to the website. Thank you, Eric, for that. I appreciate it. So if, for example, you wanted to go view the films on our website, you would go to this research tab and go to collections and look at these different collections, and you would scroll until you found the Sherman Grinberg Film Collection. And that will take you to the films we're going to look at tonight. We've got 40 different clips available currently. Yes, and of course you can visit the Sherman Grinberg website as well. They have a lot of fantastic things that are not Theodore Roosevelt that we'll hear a little bit about tonight. Anyway, we have 40 different clips available now. We have plans to, I think have over 100 available, thanks to the generosity of the Sherman Grinberg in allowing us to upload these films to our own digital library for researchers to be able to use. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a second now. And so speaking of the Sherman Grinberg, I would like to introduce my co-presenter tonight, Lance Watzke of the Sherman Grinberg Film Library, and I'm going to read a little and introduce him for you. Lance Watzke has been helping institutions, corporations, and individuals preserve, restore, and provide digital access to motion pictures and sound recordings for over 2 decades. Lance has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Fine Arts, specializing in cinematography, photography, and video production from the University of South Florida. And he also holds the distinction of being the recipient of the first Master of Arts degree in the preservation and restoration of motion pictures and recorded sound, awarded from a university in the United States. While in graduate school, Lance served as an intern at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., where he restored and digitized over 400 hours of music composed in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And he also served as an intern at the Smithsonian Folkways, where he cleaned and digitized glass records. Since completing his schooling, Lance has worked on the assessment, restoration, and digitization of motion pictures and sound recordings for diverse clients, including Warner Brothers, the Shoah Foundation, and the Georgia Archives. And Lance is currently the manager of media archives and licensing for the Sherman Grinberg Film Library, which is the home of the Paramount and American Pathé newsreel collections, dated 1897 to 1957. In addition to restoring these newsreels frame by frame, Lance works with producers and documentarians to provide the licensing rights for these newsreels, as he has for us, and to train the staff and the next generation of archivists. When Lance is not preserving these motion pictures, he likes to attend concerts, movies, and museums, work out in the gym, and take hikes in nature. And I do just want to say, guys, the work that Lance has done and the partnership that Lance reached out to us and has helped us to form is really excellent. I think you guys are going to really enjoy the film's clips that you're going to get to see tonight that they have provided for us. So with that, Lance, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Certainly appreciate it. It's a great honor to be here today. I'm talking to you from my home office in Claremont, California. Claremont is about 60 miles east, maybe 50 miles east of Los Angeles downtown. And so it's a great honor to see everyone and meet everyone today. I've been involved, as mentioned, in archiving for a really long time. And it's been a great honor to work with the Sherman Grinberg Film Library. The way that my colleagues at the Library of Congress refer to the Paramount and American Pathé newsreel collection is of the truly highest level of research value, yet most people have never seen the footage. And when I work with our film scholars and historians all over the world, they're often quite amazed as to what my team's been able to build. I have a wonderful team. We've been diligently working to restore and digitize, edit, catalog, create metadata so that material can live on our website. And it's delightful. After 7 years, we have over 50,000 historic films from 1897 to 1957. The Sherman Grinberg Film Library, what we seek to do, and this is what we were delighted to connect with the Theodore Roosevelt Center, is that we truly believe that collaboration is one of the most important tools in archiving and preservation of motion pictures. It's really about sharing it with the communities, sharing the history of the communities all over the world that understand why these subjects important. And tonight we hope to introduce a little bit of the history of the company, and then I'll show you some of the footage that my team has put together in special preparation for tonight's presentation. By sharing the material, we get to share the material with museums, libraries, archives, and schools all over the world so that teachers, students, and researchers have the opportunity to learn about the collection and utilize it in the classroom for education and for research. The only thing that we ever ask in our exchanges is if anyone ever wants to use the material for commercial use, that they contact the library to work out the terms of licensing. We have very discounted rates and provide material for a lot of documentaries that are on public broadcasting, Netflix, different streaming platforms. It's amazing. We've even shared footage with museums for use in immersive experiences. It was really fun. Some free to color footage got to be used in 360 immersive experience. It's quite fun to see how this material is used. I truly cherish my relations working with the scholars, the teachers, the researchers, the historians that bring so much passion to the work that you all do. I don't consider myself a film historian. I truly went to school to become a film doctor, how to take care of the patient. And from the beginning of getting my master's, I always thought that my role was to help historians have access to the material so that it could be further studied and used. It's by sharing it with the communities that I have this opportunity. But our story begins back in the 1950s. Sherman Grinberg originally was an accountant at 20th Century Fox Studios. And as the legend has it, Sherman was the person that convinced Darryl Zanuck, the head of the studio, of the idea of repurposing films from one production for use for another. Now, while we can't say that Sherman was the creator of what became stock footage, certainly it existed before. In fact, in looking at some of the early Pathé material, we begin to think that it was the Pathé brothers that may have originally created what would become use of stock footage for productions. All right. But we do know that Sherman grew the company to be the largest stock footage company in the United States in the pre-digital decades. Before Getty Images, before Corbis, before Thought Equity, three big powerhouse companies. The Sherman Grinberg Film Library was the place that you went and got stock footage from. We had offices in Manhattan, and we also had offices in Hollywood. Sherman grew the company to ultimately represent ABC News, MGM, Paramount, Columbia, Warner Brothers for their stock footage. It was truly and back then it's amazing. It was all film to film. What part of the film do you want to use for your production? Now, of course, it's all digitized. Our story gets really exciting in 1957. In 1957, Sherman found out that the American Pathé newsreel collection was going to be put to bid at auction, and he raised the money to get it. The Pathé collection goes back to 1896, Paris, France, when Charles Pathé and his brothers, who were pioneers in early film production and distribution, began to grow their company. They're still the Pathé Foundation in Paris. It grew so that there was the American part of Pathé that broke away early on by I believe 1920s. The American Pathé had broken away from Parisian Pathé. Parisian Pathé continued, and a lot of stock footage people know about British Pathé. That's another company. That's what grew out of the European side of this. But our part was American Pathé, and American Pathé wound up being obtained by RKO, which in turn was purchased by Warner Brothers. So in some of our films, you'll ultimately see Warner Pathé. And Sherman Grinberg wound up being able to buy basically a 50% right to that portion of our library. There's another entity in New York that owns the other half, and we have a relationship with them. Paramount gets really interesting. I find as an archivist to be rather disturbing that Paramount Studios had no idea of the value of the history within these films when they went ahead and also sold the films also at auction in 1963. Sherman wound up buying the Paramount Library along with executive producer David Wolper. David Wolper created theatrically LA Confidential, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the old 70s TV, production Roots, really important documentary in the 70s. In David Wolper's autobiography, he talks about running into Sherman in Hollywood, and they were talking shop, and it turned out that they were actually outbidding each other in the acquisition. So once they realized that, they decided to go ahead and buy it at auction together, primarily for the idea of creating early television programming. And they wound up creating 2 episodic programs, Battle Line and Survival. Battle Line is stories about wartime. Survival are kind of like humans against ravages of nature. Hindenburg was one of the episodes of that. Stories along those lines, shipwrecks. But the films, the newsreels sat dormant for a very long time. Up until I've been with the company now, this spring will be 8 years. And it was roughly about 9 years ago that the current owner of the library began to put together the idea of having the opportunity to digitize this material. I've been with the company for 8 years. We store on nitrate and specially controlled nitrate film vaults, and we bring the material in. And because of the age of the material, every cement splice has to be reinforced with tape before we can digitize it. And I have to thank my wonderful team for all of the hard work that they do. A lot of times I'm out there sharing with organizations like yours, but they're still working away frame by frame, splicing the material and getting it digitized. And now we're able to share the material all over the world. And maybe we'll answer some specific questions about the library in a little bit. What I'd like to do is to go ahead and show you what my team put together. We the team pulled together a special program of footage from 1897 to roughly 1917, different parts of the library that I hope that your community enjoys watching. Thank you. Oh my God, sure. All right. It came up, right? Thank you. Enjoy.
Wander through the years, 'twill bring both joys and tears, all cherished memories among our souvenirs.
In the sky the bright stars glittered, on the bank the pale moon shone, and 'twas from Aunt Dinah's quilting party I was seeing Nellie home. I was seeing Nellie home. I was seeing Nellie home. And 'twas from Aunt Dinah's quilting party I was seeing Nellie home. I don't want to play in your yard. I don't like you anymore. You'll be sorry when you see me sliding down our cellar door. You can holler down our rain barrel. You can climb our apple tree. I don't want to play in your yard if you won't be good to me. After the ball is over, after the break of morn, after the dancers leaving, after the stars are gone, many a heart is aching. If you could read them all, many the hopes that have vanished after the ball. Casey would waltz with the strawberry blonde, and the band played on. He'd glide across the floor with the girl he adored, and the band played on. But his brain was so loaded it nearly exploded. The poor girl would shake with alarm. He'd near leave the girl with the strawberry curls, and the band played on.
To the clarion call to arms, the country eagerly responded. Everywhere the nation's manhood flocked to the army in answer to Kitchener's demand for 100,000 recruits. Prominent figures in all walks of life followed the example of George Robey and made stirring appeals for more and yet more men. That autumn, thousands upon thousands bade a long goodbye to civilian life. From all over the world, from New Zealand and India, from Australia and Canada, from every British possession, men sprang to arms.
On a Sunday afternoon, in the merry month of June, take a trip up the Hudson or down the bay, take a trolley to Coney or Rockaway. On a Sunday afternoon, you can see the lovers boom. They work hard on Monday, but one day that's fun day is Sunday afternoon.
I hope you enjoyed that.
I certainly did, and I'm sure our guest did as well. That was my first time seeing almost all of that footage. Some really, really remarkable things there. The inaugural parade for William McKinley, the construction of the Panama Canal, both stood out in particular to me. That footage of the earthquake, of the San Francisco earthquake aftermath, was really gripping. I mean, the devastation there, right, was, I mean, you see it in photographs, but there's something about the life that a motion picture camera brings to it, right, that really is astounding. So I thank you very much for sharing all of that with us.
It's a pleasure. You're welcome.
Yes.
We are now at 6:25. If you'd like, I could bring open the website, unless you want to go ahead and
No, you can absolutely bring up the website on your end if you would like to. That'd be great. And you
Alrighty.
can show sort of your end of things, and then we will move on to the TR specific content after that.
Okay, hold on.
And if anyone does have any questions, you are welcome to put them in the chat. We're going to do questions at the end after we do some specific footage of TR. We will take questions, but put them in the chat.
Because I'm recording, it won't allow me to minimize.
Oh,
Do you want to bring up?
yes. Give me just a second and see if I can get that done.
Yeah, just go to shermangrinberg.com, which is our website, and click browse collection.
Yeah, give me just a second and I will get that shared.
Great, thank you.
Okay. We should be able to see that.
Yeah, now we can. Perfect. So I'll just
And so
direct you. If you click browse collection, you can see that we now have over 50,000. Why don't we go ahead and just put a subject into the search box? Want to say Theodore Roosevelt. Now, because it's 2 words, you're going to want to do quotations before the first letter and after the last letter.
Yes. Whoops.
Which in this case is a T on both sides.
Yes. Get taken just a second
right.
to look up
So once it gets into grid, we have 110 that come up under Theodore Roosevelt. So what you want to do is on the 4 squares below request clips.
Sorry, my Zoom window is slightly in the way.
Yeah,
Table view.
go to table view. Perfect. Thank you. Now you could go ahead and click on date. Let it sort. What it's going to do, it's going to go ahead and to sort into descending order. Click the up arrow 1 time, please. Now we're in the ascending order. So if we could see this film from 1909. If you click on the image, 2 words, hop in, play, and summary. I'll usually play it first. If it's a long clip, maybe I'll grab the little cursor and move it along.
And we're going to look at this footage again in a second.
Yeah. So while you could just hit the little X to close it. Or click the image. Click the word summary. And you'll see that that's where you find our title, our file name, date, description, could do copy file link. We can, we won't demonstrate this now, but you could highlight the file name. Or could go ahead and do it, I guess. Copies that. So Apple C if you're on a Mac, copy C if you're on PC, hit the little X to close it. Click the image, right click, click and then what is it? Save video as. Oh, you have to start it playing first. I'm sorry.
Yes. Save video as.
Yeah, then
And that
you
will
could
bring
save
up
the video as, which
your
is an
save file.
MP4 that you could save to your desktop or to a folder. It's that easy. All right. So we won't show too much of this footage, but I just wanted to show the viewers the website. They want to visit and watch footage of anything from 1897 to 1957. We welcome that. And once again, we do share the material for free with teachers, students, and researchers all over the world.
And we are so grateful that you have. And with that, I want to show them a handful of the clips that you have shared with us.
Yeah, so perfect.
I
Thank
have
you.
not edited anything together, but I have picked a handful that I think have significance in some interesting different ways. Now, most of these clips don't have sound, so if you don't hear sound, guys, don't worry. It's not on your end. That's just how these are. So let me bring up my media player here.
We're fortunate because we have a great team of editors. Makes it a little
Yes, that was a really nice piece. So, let me bring up my notes on my tablet here real quick. The screen has gone off. All right, now I've got my notes. So we're going to begin with some footage of newspaper headlines from the Spanish-American War. Now, these headlines obviously come from 1898, but the footage was created in 1932.
Weary but triumphant veterans just returned from their Cuban campaign parade up Fifth Avenue, New York, and received the acclaim of a frenzied nation.
What is the date of this?
The date of the compilation is 1932.
Yeah, could you date this footage?
There was one hero
I
among
think
them
that would have
who
been
now,
the return of
From
those soldiers.
1898?
destiny
Yes,
as the nation's leader.
but to me, what's interesting is not necessarily the 1898 part. It's what's coming right here at the end after this lovely photo painting, presented by the makers of Chesterfield cigarettes. Now, what I think is really interesting about this is, although these may have been created as historical records, these different films, these newsreels, et cetera, or as current events at the very least, documentation of those things. That's not necessarily why these films are still with us now, right? People saw their potential to be used and reused for other things, including for commercial purposes to make money. And so the fact that this was sponsored by Chesterfield cigarettes, I thought was really fascinating, right? That they're using this masculine footage of soldiers and of TR to sell more Chesterfield cigarettes. So it's important as we think about these historical records, right, to think about not only the context in which they were created, but the context in which they're being used, right? Why do people think these are important at different times in history? I think is a really interesting idea. And now I will bring up, I can do it this way. We're going to go next to that footage again of Theodore Roosevelt on safari in Kenya, which has got a lot of really interesting elements, in my opinion. This is a very brief clip, but there's a lot to be unpacked here. So we see him crossing the water on his horse, and with his, shouldn't say his, with the team of porters, Maasai warriors, I believe, of Kenya. So I'm going to play that one more time since it was so short, actually. So what's interesting about having this footage at all is that Theodore Roosevelt did not want to take a movie camera on safari at all. He wrote in a letter to Edgar Alexander Mearns, who was an ornithologist who went on the safari as well. He said, quote, "I do not think that we ought to take a moving picture machine along. I think we should be hampered by having it along, and I do not think it would serve a sufficiently useful purpose. Moreover, the advertising would be very undesirable." So he thinks having these, having a motion picture camera is going to be cumbersome and perhaps hold them up, which in some cases I'm sure it did, and it was. But also that idea, he says, the advertising would be very undesirable. And that's really interesting, right? Because this is a man who was a master of press coverage, who knew how to control his image and wanted to control his image, very much so. And in particular, any sort of commercial or public advertising was something that he did not want his name on. Most famously, there was a series of advertisements for the soft drink Moxie. You may or may not have heard of it. It's still around. It was bigger at the time. And they used his name and his face, saying, that Moxie would help you live the strenuous life, right? It was a sort of energy drink of the early 1900s. And he demanded that they remove any sort of connection to him in their advertising, in part because they simply used it without permission, but also because he did not want his image used in particular ways. And this wasn't even just commercial. There were there was an early predecessor to the Boy Scouts called the Sons of Daniel Boone, and they wanted to use his name for some of their awards, their version of merit badges. And he said they could use his name for those, but that they could not use his name in any sort of public advertising for the society. So again, it's really interesting to me that he did not want a camera along with him. He was not necessarily against being on camera, just wanted it controlled in certain ways. Thank you, Eric, for posting links here in the chat to these films as well. Although some of these titles I'm using, you may not be able to follow me. I wish I thought of that in advance. But we can make sure if anyone wants or needs further links to anything we're showing that we will get them to you. With that, the next one I want to show, actually, I had one more thought here about TR in Kenya, and I'm going to show one more time. Now, I think it's really important that we see this footage of the porters and of this big entourage that is with TR, because we often think of him as a very, as a rugged individual, as being by himself, as being alone. One humorist famously said that his biography of the Rough Rider should have been titled Alone in Cuba. But TR did not do anything that he did alone. And in particular, this safari, he relied on the help not only of people that he brought with him, but of local people who helped him along the way the entire safari. So now with that, I will go to the next one. Now, this is a very, very brief clip, but again, I think there's a lot that you're going to find interesting here in just a second. So here he is addressing a crowd, making a gesture, and then a very brief clip of FDR's face. So I'm going to show that just one more time, because again, very short. Footage of the White House, footage of TR speaking to a crowd, and then FDR's face. So if I can just jump here. One of the first things that's interesting is the records I had for this film. I wasn't sure, we weren't sure when this footage exactly was created. Obviously, we know it was created somewhere around FDR's campaign, sometime during his presidency or early campaigning. We also didn't know for sure necessarily when this footage of TR in this little clip was taken. But there's something in it that helps us identify it. If you'll notice, TR is wearing this big black armband. He was in mourning for the loss of his son, Quentin, who was killed in July 1918, who was shot down fighting in World War I. And so that gives us a clue on how to identify footage like this. So it's these little details that can be really, really interesting to us. And further, I was actually, once I knew that, I was able to find that this was for a Liberty Loans campaign in Baltimore in 1918 to support the war effort. And from there, I could find even more details if I needed to, all just from being able to see that black armband in this very brief clip. And I want to show him in motion again, because there's something particular about this motion that he's making, where he raises his hand and he's about to bring it down. The camera cuts, unfortunately, before he does it. But we see a lot in the primary sources, people talk about TR famously making a hand chopping gesture when he speaks. I'm guessing that even though that footage cut off there, that's what he was doing, was he was making this gesture that he was supposed to have made. So it's great that even though it's a little bit incomplete, that we have some footage of that, right? We can find evidence of these things that we see talked about and bring them to life in really interesting ways. Another thing that's interesting is not just TR himself, but again, at the end, we'll see FDR again there very briefly. Let me see if I can just get his face. There we go. And so that to me is really interesting, that FDR was using TR so explicitly in his own campaigning. Now, in one way that seems really obvious, right? I mean, he's, his famous fifth cousin. But also, FDR is said in many ways to have very much modeled his life after TR. He very much idolized his cousin. He will wear pince-nez, pinch eyeglasses early on in his career. He will sort of speak in a similar way. He will attend Harvard and Columbia and enter politics. He will become the governor of New York, the assistant secretary of the Navy, and then, of course, president. So he did a lot of the same things that his cousin did. All right, next I would like to show, if I can find it here. Sorry, my windows are kind of all over the place. What did I want next? Oh, Panama. So this footage here of a parade in Panama and TR speaking at some sort of big public event here in Panama, I really, really love. TR is the first American president to travel overseas. He breaks what's called an ironclad custom, what he calls it, of presidents never traveling abroad. And this was for all kinds of practical reasons, mostly. But what's interesting to me, even more than this very important footage, again, footage of the president being overseas for the first time. But if you'll notice this parade, oh, I need to jump backward. This parade is passing by a bar, and I am obsessed with this bar ever since the first time I saw this footage, because it appears to be a sort of an American bar, or one catering to Americans, or at least wanting to seem American. So it's called the Turf, and you can read, if you look closely, the sign says it has wines, beer, and liquors of the best brands. It also says there's billiards, American pool, cigars, and ice cream. You can see if you pick some different frames here. So that brings up questions, right? Again, is this bar catering to the the Americans that are in Panama? To what degree is Panama starting to become connected to America in those ways. A lot of interesting things just from this background moment of this footage. Let me see. I'm going to skip some of the things I have chosen here in the interest of time, but there's a couple of things that I do still want to show. Let's see. One of them here is Theodore Roosevelt Jr. And Kermit Roosevelt and their wives returning from a trip to India, a hunting expedition that Ted and Kermit went on. The footage itself isn't necessarily, I mean, it's remarkable in its quality, but there's nothing particular happening in it. They are just being interviewed for the news. That being said, that demonstrates just what celebrities even Theodore Roosevelt's sons were. This footage is from 1926. And the Theodore Roosevelt's sons were celebrities in their own right. And this trip to India that they took, this hunting trip, was sort of, in some ways, a sequel to TR's safari, right? It was a scientific expedition. TR's safari was undertaken for the Smithsonian to collect specimens, and Ted and Kermit's trip was for the Field Museum in Chicago to collect specimens for them. And they discovered new species of skink, which is a lizard. They discovered several other, subspecies of animals, did a lot of sort of scientific work while they were there. So again, carrying on their father's legacy, and we can see them sort of developing the celebrity. And interestingly enough, their wives are there with them. They appear to still be on the ship. Their wives met them in India toward the end of the journey. And then they all came home together there toward the end of 1926. And I have another sound clip I would like to show here. And the sound actually is significant to this one, and the title card will tell you.
This group of famous American women is here to launch an educational campaign for the improvement of the conditions that make America's maternity death rate the highest in the world. Standing from left to right are Mrs. Herbert Hoover, Mrs. Theodore Roosevelt Sr., Mrs. John Sloan, and Mrs. Kermit Roosevelt.
When the women and the men really take to heart what they've heard today, that out of those 16,000 deaths, 10 were preventable, that they will perhaps turn to an old book that they may not have read carefully, but still has the largest circulation of any book in the world. It is called the Bible, and they will search in the prophets, and they will find the text, give the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Let us do that by working with all our hearts and souls for the Maternity Center.
So that footage is really fascinating to me. Again, there's a handful of reasons. It's from 1931. As you saw on that one title card, this is the first sound pictures ever made of Mrs. Theodore Roosevelt Sr. But in terms of the context of just having sound at all, sound pictures are a relatively new technology still at this time, right? A couple of years old. The sort of most famous, credited as the first sound feature film is The Jazz Singer in 1927. Lance, do correct me if I get anything wrong about the film history part. That is not my area. But sound technology is relatively new at this time, sound pictures. So this is a big deal for them to have this sound footage of her and for us to still have it today. The Maternity Center Association, to whom she is speaking, is now called Childbirth Connection, is the name of this organization. And they are launching this nationwide campaign for a better maternal care at this time, and specifically, as they said, to lower the infant mortality rate. They will end up founding the first school of midwifery in the United States in this year, in 1931, in part thanks to these nationwide campaigns where they get people like Mrs. Herbert Hoover, Mrs. Roosevelt, the other Mrs. Roosevelt, Mrs. Kermit Roosevelt there, But what's interesting too is Edith Roosevelt is a woman who is often said by people to be, I take this quote specifically from firstladies.org, Edith Roosevelt is highly moralistic and has a religious sensibility. And so here she's speaking about the Bible, and you can see the importance of the morals of the Bible to her, and the way she's able to project that is really interesting. I also really like, if you watch, the sound is less important here than the footage. If you will watch on the right side of the footage, Kermit Roosevelt there in the background with the mustache, he's got this little smirk right before she makes this remark about, she says, the book with the greatest circulation in the world. And he gives a little smirk, and then she says the Bible, and he kind of knows that this little joke is coming. And it's really fun to watch the expressions on Kermit Roosevelt's face as his mother speaks. I just think that's really, really interesting to watch the people who are not supposed to be the center of attention in this footage. So like I said, there's a couple of little smirks that he makes because he knows the kinds of remarks that his mother is going to make. With that, I want to go ahead and stop sharing the footage. There's so much more I could share with you. But I do want to take some time for questions and conversation. But do please go to the Sherman Grinberg website, go to our website, look at these clips, look at the many others that we've got for you. There's some really, really fascinating stuff. But with that, let me open up the floor to questions for myself or Lance.
As I see Chris raising his hand.
Yes, everyone, Chris O'Brien, Dr. O'Brien is the director of the Theodore Roosevelt Center. Thank you for joining us.
I want to jump in and thank the two of you. Lance in particular, this is the first time that I've seen you virtually or otherwise. We've spoken in the past, but these two, this project, let's be very clear that what you're seeing tonight is collaboration. Lance reached out to us originally and offer. We couldn't be happier to have access to the collection, to be able to share it with our patrons, our friends, and with scholars around the world through the website. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you, William, for spearheading this for us. As with Lance, I've got a great team of people who I'm working with who make this all possible. I do have a question at the end of my great big thank yous. So there is the music that was chosen by your team, Lance, is period correct. And I'm wondering about how the decision was made about what music goes with footage.
For what I showed?
Yes.
What we did is, that's a really good question. A lot of the audio comes from Paramount. Paramount in the early 1930s created a wonderful program called Screen Souvenirs. It's possibly one of my favorite part of the entire collection, because in early 1930s, I think 32 or 33, Paramount decided to dive into very early footage from 1897 to 1910 and put it together into episodes where in many cases the footage and even maybe the songs that were collected in 1930s don't exist elsewhere. And so because we have the Screen Souvenirs material, we were able to get the audio. By 1930s, of course, they had audio and films. So there was singing, barbershop quartets. There's so much great depth to Screen Souvenirs. So thank you for asking about that.
Yes, and so that people do know, many of the clips that we have of TR that still exist are through that Screen Souvenirs creation. So again, the fact that they preserved those films at that time is really a boon to us as researchers and as enthusiasts who just want to see this really fascinating footage.
It's become a really popular area for our film historians within our collection. They've been diving into that a lot.
Yes. I do have a question in the chat here that may be better for you to answer. Elizabeth Barber asks, is it best to use the footage for presentation directly from the Theodore Roosevelt Center website, or should they download it from your website if they want to use it for a presentation?
For a presentation, they could go either way.
Yes.
One of the things,
just make
because
sure-
I've been an archivist for a long time, I cherish my relationships with the organizations. And I've been recently thinking about developing that further into like a community of organizations, because right now we've partnered with a lot of them. And I really want historians to know to come to your organization as a primary source for their history or research.
Yes, and Dr. Barber, you will notice if you go to that footage that's on our website, it will still have that Sherman Grinberg watermark on it, so you will still be crediting them. So everyone gets credit. It works out for everyone when you use it from our website, as long as that's okay. So yes, and again, there's like 40 clips up there now. My hope is to get some more up there soon. Again, both of TR and of immediate family there, and there's some great footage of Ted as Governor General of the Philippines, all kinds of really great legacy stuff too. So any other questions?
It's really important to remember that we're not only sharing for the sense of sharing, but in sharing with organizations, it creates more preservation of the thing.
Yes, the more we can circulate this, the more people know it exists and is there to be used, the better. And that's exactly what we're doing with all of the stuff that we've got that's Theodore Roosevelt related, right? Because this material all exists other places, but as we centralize it and make people aware of it, it creates those layers of protection and preservation, like you say.
We've been developing a lot of great uses with our organizational partners.
Oh, Lance, tell them, just because this one is interesting to me in particular, tell them about your what you found for the Ringling Museum in Florida.
Oh, of the footage of Calvin Coolidge.
Yes, Calvin Coolidge.
Yeah, we're kind of running out of time, but
yes,
otherwise I'd bring that up. But it was footage. It was really interesting because the original catalog card said that it was important because the president at the time, Calvin Coolidge, had gone to the circus. But in sharing the material with the archivist, much like sharing the material tonight and previously with you, you bring the material, you understand what you're looking at. They saw this footage and they're like, Lance, it's great the president was there, but this is the first film we've ever seen with John Ringling actually at the circus.
Yeah. So it's great when we're able to share these materials with people because everybody sees something new or different when you share it with these different audiences. So we do hope you will use this footage for presentations, for research, for anything that you can, so that more and different audiences will learn about it.
When you cued into why he was wearing the armband, I thought that was brilliant. That's an example of something that I would never have known until it was pointed out to me.
Yeah, and we have a couple of photographs from that day that he spoke in Baltimore in 1918. But yes, he was still mourning the loss of Quentin having been shot down in World War I. So
that's similar to, we found footage for the American Museum of Natural History of a dinosaur dig in Wyoming. Yeah. And you see them actually drawing where the dinosaur bones are on location. And right around the same time that we donated the footage to the museum had received the actual document that you see in the newsreel.
Wow.
It was really exciting for the paleontologists.
It's always amazing when you can make those connections between the different materials.
Indeed.
Well, we are running up on 8 o'clock. There are a couple, or 7 o'clock in Lance's time zone. But if there are any other questions, comments, anything, I'm happy to take them.
Well, I was. This is Steve Easton. Lance, thanks for doing this. I'm a non-historian. I'm curious as to whether you are still whether people are finding new resources for you, and if so, how often that happens and how that supplements your collection, or is that not the nature of your work?
It was hard to hear. Can you hear him
Oh,
okay?
Yes, he asked how often you find new materials, how often people bring new materials, how your collection is supplemented, if that's the case with your work, if new materials come to you. Is that fair? Characterize your question, Dr. Easton?
You know, it's amazing because of my position, I get to see this quite often. Discoveries now, sometimes the discovery may just be that something's been sitting on a shelf in a library or archive. The librarian or archivist knows that it exists, but when the historian discovers that something's sitting there, that's a new discovery for the person finding the material. And then there's also big, grandiose discoveries. I remember one of my favorite ones was I was contacted by a historian out of Kentucky that was looking for a Pathé newsreel of story 1920s Kentucky, I think Lexington, where they saw a little girl had been murdered, and the cameraman had almost incited a riot outside of the courthouse. The footage was actually found in the frozen tundra off of the Yukon Territory of Eastern Canada, buried in the snow, buried in the permafrost. It was part of the discovery called the Dawson City Film Find that happened in the early 70s. There's a wonderful film about it. But actually the film that this historian had contacted me for, the filmmaker that was doing a documentary about this discovery, modern time, found the film and contacted the historian and said, hey, we found the film that you wrote about in your book. Next thing you know, I'm being contacted by the historian. Lance, we found the film. And so stay focused, stay constantly looking. At the same point, though, sometimes it becomes challenging because it is property, and depending on how something was donated to an institution may mean whether or not the institution even has ability to share or what the extent of that sharing. Right now, I'm dealing with a historian working with a major museum, trying to get access to something that he's having a hard time getting access to. So it's difficult. There's a lot of different deposit agreements. There's a lot of it's not really always about copyright. Everyone's always asking me right away about copyright. These early films, it's actually about property and ownership of that property. It has nothing to do with copyright. Copyright is ultimately, what do you take this footage and turn it into, right? Maybe you turn it into a production, an exhibit. That's something that you might want to copyright, right? Any other questions?
Well, I do want to say thank you for joining us, Dr. Easton. Dr. Steve Easton is the president of Dickinson State University, where the Theodore Roosevelt Center is.
Oh, beautiful.
So we thank you.
Great honor. Thank you for asking. One has to wonder, what is the relationship between the Theodore Roosevelt Center and special collections within Dickinson University? Is there a good working relation?
The answer to that is it's in flux. We're at an inflection point right now where things are growing, things are changing, and we're developing that relationship as we speak. So
good. It works out good when you all can work together nicely.
Yes, that we
not
do.
always easy, right?
Yes. Dr. Barber asked, what is the name of your book? I'm not sure. I don't know if I understand your question, Dr. Barber. You may have to let us know who you were speaking to. Maybe that got lost in the mix as we were talking about so many other things. my colleague Eric wanted to point out that the footage that the Library of Congress has of some of these events is not nearly as well restored as the Grinberg Library versions of the footage.
Oh,
If you watch the Library of Congress versions, you can't make out any of those signs, for example, at that bar in Panama I was talking about. Whereas the clarity of the Grinberg films, we can absolutely see these little details that can make or break this footage, right? It can make it into something totally new when you can see that American bar. Dr. Barber says she thought
it'd be interesting to do a search of provenance. And one of the things I often get asked, the question related to the question that was just asked about finding lost films. Often I'm asked if we have much information about how the newsreel companies work themselves. How did this footage actually get captured? Was there a Pathé cameraman that went to Africa, Kenya, with Teddy, or is there any information on who shot that footage, and have you found anything like that?
I have not found any, and I would love to, and that's the kind of information that we often look for too, right? Is the production of these records, of the metadata, right? That's very much what we're doing with this digital library, is trying to find as much of the information about these records as we can.
Yeah, and this is why we cherish these relationships.
Yes. So hopefully between the two of us, we will find some more information.
Is Claudia Berg, is she one of your professors?
She is of the State Historical Society of North Dakota.
Oh, okay. Special shout out to the state for
yes.
We have wonderful material about North Dakota and South Dakota.
Oh.
That's what we like to hear.
Wonderful footage of the building of Mount Rushmore, but that's not your state. That's next door.
No. It's okay.
Any other
Teddy's on the
questions?
mountain.
Sorry, I was monitoring.
I have one more question. For
Sure.
archivists in your area of the country, do you know what the archival or regional archival organization for the Dakotas is?
The Midwestern Archives Conference.
That's the
MAC.
Midwestern archive. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, in the chat we were investigating the mystery of the book that was being referred to, but we may have solved that. Dr. Barber also let us know that Sagamore Hill National Historic Site has films in their exhibits, which may be accessible and may be accessible to the Theodore Roosevelt Center. So we may be able to get some more films up there. And again, too, talking about the Library of Congress footage, there is often like different moments or different angles compared to the Grinberg collection. I'm not sure how that happened, but so sometimes comparing those films side by side, we can see some different moments as well, too. So that's worth keeping in mind.
Fascinating. Have you seen any other footage from the trip to Kenya?
I have seen there is some in the Library of Congress, and actually,
There is some.
well, there's about 13 or 14 minutes total that I'm aware of footage of the safari. And what's interesting is, again, he didn't want to take the camera, and he also didn't want the footage really released commercially, publicly, that kind of thing. But then I can't remember now who filmed it, but then a rival company filmed fake footage in California, like this is TR's safari, and they faked it and tried to sell it as real. And so then TR said they could release the actual footage of the real safari, and was made into a sort of a very short documentary, for lack of a better term, that's like 13, 14 minutes long. It's some really, really fascinating stuff in there too. So
Unfortunately, the idea of fake news is not a new concept.
it's as old as the news.
We have footage of the 1919 race riots, and gosh, it is so fake that it's like guys walking down the street, and the soldier just stops him, and the guy's just emptying his pockets. It's almost like it's so fake that it's almost comical, actually.
Yeah, Yeah, it looks like some of the comedy films of that era.
Yeah. And yet
Wow.
you realize that what's going on is so serious and so important.
Yeah,
There were 19 race riots between 1918 and 1919. And
Yeah.
we're fortunate to have some of the material.
yes. Well, it's about 10 minutes past now. I do want to be conscious of people's time, but please do reach out if you have any questions, concerns, comments, anything. We'll be happy to speak with you and to help you however we can. Like I said, we want this footage to be used. Thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate your time and we appreciate your attention. Thank you.
And one last thing, remember
Yes.
that we want to share broadly with other museums, libraries, archives, and schools. So if there's footage that we could share with organizations that anyone in this meeting is aware of, please contact me.
Yes.
It's only
and
in
we will-
sharing them with the community that this footage can relive.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, with that, I will say goodbye, good night, and thank you again all for being here. Thank you for your nice comments. We appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be able to have another virtual event like this in the future, and we'll see you all again then. But for now,
Thank you.
good night.
Have a good night, everyone.